Do you regret resigning in light of all this?
Yeah.
How long would you have stayed on?
Well, that would be up to the people. I thought on September the 19th, 2014, the heavy lifting had been done. I mean, there aren't many countries in the world that get to almost 50% support for independence and then go backwards. That's very, very unusual. And I thought opportunities, I mean, it's difficult to say when exactly. I mean, I didn't know then there was going to be Brexit, for example. So when exactly it was going to come, but I thought over the next few years there would be an opportunity to move things forward. And I think that should have been done. I think the politics were there to do it. And I think there were a number of missed opportunities.
Let me say this to the London parties in terms that leave no room for misunderstanding. Scotland's voice will be heard on the great issue of the country's future. You know, Labour want a referendum on the alternative vote. The Tories want a referendum in Europe. The Liberals want everything else. And they have the effrontery to refuse the people of Scotland the right to speak on their constitutional future. So let this party be clear. No political party can long deny the right of the people of Scotland to exercise self-determination and survive as a political force in Scotland.
First Minister Alex Salmond making his feelings crystal clear during his keynote address at the 75th Annual SNP Conference a decade ago. Just 10 days after that warning from the First Minister and what would prove to be a defining moment in UK and Scottish politics, the UK government agreed to a referendum letting the people of Scotland decide whether or not to continue to be part of the UK. And the referendum was the first time that 16 and 17-year-olds were given the right to vote.
It was really like a momentous thing and it was really exciting at the time, but you could feel it was like a tangible sort of like just not knowing what was going to happen, and people were getting really sort of animated about it, and people that even like teachers and like people in the community, older people that you'd never probably seen them getting so like not riled but animated about this vote that was going to happen. So that was a really interesting part of it as well, and something really exciting and amazing to be involved in and to be like, allowed to take part in as well.
I remember people were using Facebook a lot at the time, and I was quite open about the fact that I voted against it, and I got quite a lot of hate for that. A lot of people said that that was wrong, and I do remember it quite vividly because I remember actually being quite upset about it. I was getting abusive messages, so yeah, I do remember it, yeah.
I mean, that to many would be a surprise.
I mean, it wasn't very nice. I remember a lot of older people having a lot to say about the fact that I was voting no. But I think a lot of people who voted no maybe kept it quiet because obviously, you know, no was the winning answer. So I think I was maybe too loud about it.
I actually have a bit of a shameful story. I was only just eligible to vote, freshly turned 16 and not particularly politically engaged. I voted no. I then went and got a politics degree, and I am now an avid advocate for Scottish independence.
So you've gone full circle, really?
Full circle. I'm very ashamed to admit that I voted no. Like, I don't admit it to people often, something that I'll maybe only admit on a night out after a few wines, but it is one of my greatest shames. I really regret it, and I kind of wish that I didn't have the opportunity to vote when I was so sort of uninformed.
But while the people of Scotland were heading to the polls, one reporter spent the day with Alex Salmond. Matt Bendoris was allowed incredible access to the First Minister and recalls his mood at the time. I mean, obviously, he was under immense pressure that day, you know, the weight of the country sort of on his shoulders. You know, what was he like?
I found him different from normal. He was more reflective mood. It's funny because he mentions me following him when I was in the car with him all this day in his book, Alex Salmond, The Dream Shall Never Die, and he claims I was the one that was in the more reflective mood, but that's not how I recall it. He was definitely more reflective as we drove around. He was pointing out things that happened in the past, and this was what. So it was kind of unusual for Alex because he's normally a lot more forward thinking or you know, he just doesn't normally do the past as much. He doesn't normally do you know, he's full of self-confidence, isn't he? You know, he's the ultimate politician when it comes to that, you know.
Do you think the pressure was starting to show?
I think so. It started well for him the day though, because Andy Murray had tweeted, let's do this, and he was cock-a-hoop at that, absolutely cock-a-hoop. So the wind was in his sails a bit then, but I got the funny feeling as the day went on and the more people we met, and normally when people were meeting them back then, he had a kind of a bit of the rock star to him, but you'd be asking, have you voted? And they would just say yes, and then they wouldn't say who they'd voted for, what side they'd voted for, and I was starting to think, oh, this is not going great, you know. And I thought to myself, well, it is the northeast, so perhaps, you know, with the oil and that kind of side of things, it's not going to, they're not going to be majority yes voters. But there was just that sense in the air for all the razzmatazz that I think he was sensing that this wasn't going to go the right way.
And placing bets as well, I believe.
Well, so at the end of the day, so after 11 hours with him, we went to eat on the green in Ellen, and he'd kind of commandeered the top floor of this restaurant, and so we had his command centre, which was the office, restaurant office, and a private dining room place upstairs. And he was very excited when it came to about 9 o'clock at night, say, and he was like, right, let's check the odds. He says they would have started to tumble by now. And he went on to his betting portal, whatever, Betfair, and looked across. They had not budged all day. It was overwhelming for a no vote. And but that didn't stop him placing another, 20 quid a throw across the board. And I remember thinking, because I don't bet apart from the Grand National and the National Lottery, but I'm not a punter. And I remember thinking, this is pure folly. This is just money. I mean, the bet has not shifted, and it's only 2 hours to go before the polls close, and yet he was still throwing money at it. And I almost felt he was doing it for my benefit at that point. Like, oh, don't worry, they're all going to start coming down now, but they weren't, and they weren't going to move.
You took the next question out of my mouth there, because it almost seems to me, from what you've said, that he knew the game was already up, but he was then trying to sort of show a bit of bravado. Yeah,
that's exactly it. And he started to a bit more kind of peacock type. Then he opened champagne, and I don't know about you, but I only ever open champagne when I've got something to celebrate. Birthdays, anniversaries, whatever it is, good news, and without drawing any other connotations whatsoever, it felt a bit Hitler's bunker to me, as in, the tanks were rolling in, and here we are, partying as if it's, everything's fine, and it felt strange. It really did feel strange. Moira was there by that point, his closest advisor. The telly was on, everything's got, and here he was, coughing champagne. That felt wrong, actually, to me.
I voted no back then, and I would still probably vote no if there was another referendum.
And why is that?
I wouldn't pretend to be a political expert or know that much about politics, but I think there's an element of risk that in the unknown of Scotland becoming totally independent, and I probably just don't understand how that would be feasible enough. So I think in my head it's the safe option.
I remember there being a lot of talk from the older generation not wanting us to vote for independence. Like, there was quite a lot in my family as well, like disagreement. But I remember just feeling this sense of, I want to do the right thing, and I think the family members that I aligned myself with and the friends that I had, we all had the same idea that independence meant, Scotland, you can vote for what you actually want, and it's not decided by anybody else, and it's your own country. And while I will admit I was not, a politics mogul, I didn't know a lot, I think it kind of sparked something in me to want to live in a better country, live a better way, and just do the right thing. So while I didn't fully understand it at that age, I'm really glad that I got to vote. I'm really glad that I have the opportunity to vote, and I think that it's definitely helped me growing up understanding why politics is the way it is and what we should do, I
don't remember going in. I do remember a lot of the chatter about it and stuff like that.
Who did you vote for?
Am I allowed to say that? To Remain.
Why was that?
Just at the time, to be honest, I probably was quite comfortable with what was going on at the time. I was young enough to not really know any different, and it was actually just from the opinions I'd heard, what I took in and stuff like that, that I thought it seemed the right call.
Millions of yes and no voters headed to the polling stations across Scotland, with the total number of ballot papers counted in the referendum across the country being 3.6 million, with the turnout at almost 85%. After the votes were counted, 55% of Scotland decided to remain in the United Kingdom. That result led to Alex Salmond resigning.
I think actually what won the campaign for no was the offer of something else. Because the fundamental weakness of the no campaign, not just over the last a couple of months, but over the last couple of years, has been their total, absolute, complete inability to put forward a positive prospectus or case. And therefore, when one is presented, even with 24 hours to go, in a way which people look, and many people, without your long studying of politics and my long practicing and looking at how these things have been extracted like teeth from Westminster over the last generation, will look at that and say, surely that is a vow. I think that was. And when you hear from the doorstep, but you know, the phrase, but aren't we going to win anyway? You know, we'll either get independence or we'll get, then of course there is a suspicion that many people began to believe that something substantial was about to be offered for Scotland. Now, that's what happened in my estimation, but where we are now is to make sure that vows and promises and commitments which are offered are realised. If they aren't realised, then I suspect there'll be a bitter harvest, not for the people of Scotland, a bitter harvest for those who engaged in that. 20 years as leader of the Scottish National Party is a fair spell of the last quarter century, and the last 7 years as First Minister of Scotland has been the privilege of my life.
A decade on, and the former First Minister reflected where it all went wrong.
I suspect we got to the front and then lost the lead. And I think if we had to look at anything very closely, it's how we responded to the vow, the Free Amigos coming up to Scotland, the regrouping of the establishment in the last week. I think perhaps we concentrated too much on rousing the grassroots and perhaps not enough on television set pieces in terms of staged things for broadcast in the last week of the campaign. But listen, if we'd fought the perfect campaign, we might just have done it. That's possible. But I just suppose any campaign is ever perfect. And one thing that did happen in the referendum, of course, is the losers of the referendum came out as the political winners, and the winners of the referendum came out as the political losers. You know, when you get into the last stages of a very close race, small things can have a decisive impact. Momentum becomes very, very important. And I think, you know, we lost a bit of momentum in the last few days. Remember, you know, the polls showed us ahead for the first time ever, 10 days beforehand. But ultimately, can you ever fight the perfect campaign? I don't know. I mean, I think what you have to judge is well, maybe it was just, you know, from 30% to 50% was just a bridge too far. Well, one of the reasons, you know, I stood down was because if you took responsibility, I mean, you know, the psyche of Scotland, Scotland loves somebody being done down. And, you know, it put me in the position of the person who'd been done down by the establishment, by the press, by the BBC, by whoever. I wasn't under any pressure to resign, but by taking responsibility, it cleared the field for the SNP. And this was a quick thing, remember. I mean, when I stood down as First Minister in November 2014, Yes was back in the lead. The SNP were at 55% for Westminster in polling in Moray. And I think my own personal ratings were plus 47%. So, you know, it gave those who lost the referendum emerged very quickly as the political winners. Now, whether you call that buyer's regret or whether you call people thinking what might have been, I think the important thing is it's not just a matter of a few weeks in a reaction now. It's a matter of being able to judge over 10 years.
Yeah.
And I return to my point that I don't think there's many folk in Scotland that would say that we've had a good 10 years.
Better Together was formed with the support of the three main pro-union political parties in Scotland, including Scottish Labour, the Scottish Conservatives and the Scottish Liberal Democrats. The campaign director for the group, whose slogan was "No Thanks," was the Scottish Labour advisor and activist Blair McDougall.
Looking at the campaign as a whole,
it's easy to argue that Better Together actually lost the campaign, given the yes vote share rose from around 30 to 45%.
Well, it depends how you judge winning and losing. I would say that's when the votes are counted. I think for us, when you look back over the last 10 years since the referendum, countries all over the world have been offered populist and nationalist propositions since then, and Scotland is the only country in the world that in that period said no thanks. So I think our win looks better as time has gone on.
What was the most influential factor in the no win?
Funnily enough, I think it's actually the SNP themselves lacked a confidence in their own argument. They spent their whole campaign saying to people that everything would change and nothing would change. And I think people could smell something wrong with that. They didn't quite believe that they were being told the truth by the other side. And I think that's what we were able to exploit on issues like currency, because people thought, well, if they're not willing to make the argument in a full-throated way for leaving the United Kingdom, why should we follow them?
Gordon Brown helped orchestrate the pledge for more powers after the referendum. And he also said in the weeks before the referendum that Scotland would be moving quite close to something near federalism. So are we near to federalism now?
Absolutely. If you compare the powers, the financial powers, the legislative powers that the Scottish Parliament has to assemblies in federal systems, it's, we compare very, very favourably to that. I think the real argument that people who criticise us on the powers of the Scottish Parliament are making is they say, well, you promised us fiscal autonomy, that we would keep all of our own money and spend all of our own money. But actually the pledge that was made at the time explicitly said that we were going to keep our share of UK funds, that we were going to continue to be part of that system. So I think we've absolutely got what was promised. So I think what Nicola did was remove some of the negatives of Alex Salmond's leadership. So most of those undecided voters who ended up breaking for no in the end, they didn't really like Alex Salmond. They didn't quite know why, but they just knew that they didn't like the cut of his jib. And so I think Nicola Sturgeon, certainly initially, was able to remove some of those negatives from them. Of course, whether her political brand has survived in the long run is another matter.
Obviously, Alex has spoken about this since, and what do you think that the no campaign won the race, or the yes campaign lost the race?
I think it's probably the old greatest hits, as we call it, which is, what about pension payments? What about currency? These kind of boring questions that the SP almost roll their eyes at every time it comes up now, but they still haven't been answered 10 years on. And, what currency will people have in their pocket? They still are unable to say that. What about the pensions from the government? The government, your state pension? Who's going to pay that? Who's going to foot the bill for that? They haven't answered these questions. And the funny thing is I think the polling showed at the time, but those who had nothing to lose were more likely to vote yes, because it's just the kind of reset button, isn't it? Anyone with, a house or a pension, or is worried about what currency their wages are going to be paid in, are going to vote no. And I think it's as fundamental as that. It's the economy stupid, as they always say.
Following Alex Salmond's resignation after defeat in the referendum, Nicola Sturgeon was elected unopposed as the SNP leader in November 2014. She was appointed as First Minister, becoming the first woman to hold either position, and is the only First Minister to serve 3 terms in office. Nicola Sturgeon tried to force a second independence referendum, but that was blocked by the UK Supreme Court in November 2022.
What today's ruling tells us, however, is that the Scotland Act does not, in fact, uphold that long-held understanding of the basis of the relationships that constitute the UK. On the contrary, it shatters that understanding completely. Let's be absolutely blunt. A so-called partnership in which one partner is denied the right to choose a different future, or even to ask itself the question, cannot be described in any way as voluntary or even a partnership at all. So this ruling confirms that the notion of the UK as a voluntary partnership of nations, if it ever was a reality, is no longer a reality.
Was this relentless focus on her personally over the past decade a mistake?
Well, I mean, certainly Nicola's record in winning election as a communicator was very good. Her problem, I don't think it's so much as to where you present things as a personal image or a party. Her problem was that the slippage in standards of governance, that's one. And secondly was, for reasons that I find totally inexplicable, the pursuit of issues which, like self-identification, which even if you believed they were the most important issue in God's earth, you would have said, well, you know, if we do this, we'll split the country as we're trying to unite it to go to independence. So why on earth would you go headlong into an issue like that when you're meant to be pursuing an independence campaign? That's why I smile when people say, you know, they were too busy campaigning for independence. I think, particularly over the last 5 years, the independence campaign from the Scottish Government has been difficult to define.
We had a referendum 10 years ago and a failed attempt for a second one. So should Scotland be allowed an opportunity to vote again to become an independent nation?
Maybe there should be a regularised, maybe it should be kind of a regular thing, that every X number of years there should be a referendum. Perhaps that would be a fair way of doing it, maybe every 15, 20 years, but in my mind it's too soon now.
I think that's the thing is democracy like that's always good, that, you know, even if you don't agree with it, it's like actually you probably don't want the door to be closed permanently. That's like actually there should maybe be something in place that says every so often we do look at this and review it and at least ask the question so we know whether it's the right thing or not.
I think in terms of us actually entering into the UK, there wasn't really much of a choice there for the people that lived here, so I think it's only fair that we do have the right to express our opinion, to go in the direction that we want to and when we want to.
I think the Yes campaign kind of shot themselves in the foot with the whole once in a lifetime opportunity, because now everyone on the other side is sort of taking that and running with it and going, oh well, it was once in a lifetime and it's not that long after, but everything's changed since then. And even then, it's 10 years, that's a long time. A lot has changed. The EU is a massive, massive issue, and I think it should be a semi-regular thing, but I think that 5 years after, any sooner probably would have been too soon. But I do think it is something that maybe just as there's major political changes, then it should be something that we circle back to.
I do think it would be quite silly and maybe unfair to have another referendum, because if the answer had been the opposite one, they wouldn't have then went back and given everyone a second chance. So it does seem maybe a bit unfair. I mean, are they going to keep doing referendums until they get the answer they want?
So do you think you were a better First Minister than Nicola Sturgeon?
Well, you know, people can judge. They can judge that, and maybe they'll get a chance at the next Scottish elections to judge that. Hopefully, they will. But so that's for others to judge. What I would say is, there's no doubt that the track record of the Scottish Government was part of the reason for the increased support for independence, and there's equally no doubt now that the recent track record of the Scottish Government is undermining confidence in Scotland's ability to govern itself, and that has to be put right. Now, the new First Minister says he's going to put it right. Quite clearly, he wouldn't have said that if there wasn't anything to put right.
In the wake of the referendum, you wrote a book called The Dream Shall Never Die. Do you think another referendum will happen in your lifetime?
Well, whether it's a referendum or not, I think Scotland will be independent in my lifetime. I think in the absence of a referendum and offer, and one's not an offer, then clearly what you want to do is to take the second vote in a Scottish election, which is a party and a policy vote, not a tactical constituency vote and voted to get somebody else out and all the rest of it, but it's actually a policy vote in principle. You look for a majority of the vote, which you would have to have, and a majority of seats in the Parliament. That is a mandate for independence, if you have it clearly stated in your manifesto. So a referendum isn't the only way to democratically get to independence. And if you've got an absolute block from Westminster, then you have to find a way around it. You don't just keep banging up against it.